Hello, and welcome to the FI Entrepreneur, Financial Planning for the Risk Taker. This podcast will show you how to achieve FI through entrepreneurial pursuits by developing a well-calibrated and thought-out plan for risk management so that you can maximize the rewards.
Hosted by certified financial planner, enrolled agent, and serial entrepreneur Ben Martinek, this is the FI Entrepreneur, Financial Planning for the Risk Taker.
The information presented in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. None of the content is presented as investment advice. Consult your financial professional before acting on any of the information presented in this show. Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us, everybody, for another episode here with the FI Entrepreneur Financial Planning for the Risk Taker. It's good to have you all today join us for our topic. I am joined with my fantastic co-host, Andrew Bensavanga. Andrew, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Introduce? Boy, 20 episodes in, they better know me by now. If they're not, they got to recycle back to episode 1. I'm just happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
Happy to be here.
You're a good tag-along, Andrew. We love having you around. Well, the show today focuses on healthcare insurance and what your options are for not necessarily healthcare insurance, but healthcare in general. How can you get this covered for you in the pursuit of entrepreneurship? I think a lot of this angle is geared towards someone who's transitioning away from a corporate job, W-2 income, and it's now looking at a potential stumbling block for what to do. But before we get into the details of that transition and how to handle your healthcare, Andrew's reminded me we've got a great plug we need to make for one of our new sponsors called credit.com. So the question of the pursuit of financial independence oftentimes requires some level or use of credit. We'll see this manifested primarily in forms of mortgages, but it could be credit cards, auto loans, or only funding opportunities. Could be small business loans for your small business. And the question here is, what kind of interest can you get on those loans? And can there be a cost-saving mechanism for making that debt not be quite so expensive for you? Well, folks, we want to introduce you to credit.com. They help you analyze that FICO score that you have, help you to make small changes that can have a big impact in driving that FICO score up and ultimately delivering a cost savings to you through lower overall financing charges in the form of interest rates. Extra Credit also provides protection to your identity with up to $1 million of ID insurance. So if you do enroll in their monthly subscription plan, there is a benefit there in terms of identity theft protection. And I don't know, Andrew, what else do you have here for items that you love about these guys?
Well, it's a great service. I didn't use them specifically, but some of the tips that you might receive would help you increase your credit score. In my own situation, just the simple fact of opening another credit card actually increased my credit score by 50 points. And that action could actually lower your borrowing costs in the future. So this kind of stuff, while it seems like small peanuts, it actually can add up to pretty big results at the end of the day.
Well, as everyone knows, we have higher interest rates right now on mortgages. And so whatever we can do to cut that back can ultimately be a big cost savings, especially over the life of the mortgage. If you're to hold the mortgage full term, or if there's potential for refinancing and other things to do later on to push that cost down. But in the short term, when your interest rate is the most impactful in the early part of your amortization schedule, driving those overall interest charges down could be a great solution. So to sign up for Extra Credit, go to credit.com/the FIPod. Again, that's credit.com/the FIPod and get started there. To sweeten the deal, you can even get the first 7 days absolutely free. It's just $24.99 plus tax a month after the free trial. You can cancel anytime. So go check out Extra Credit today and start working on your credit goals. Fun stuff there, Mr. Andrew. Thanks for that little reminder. Now, as we get into the heart and the gist of the podcast episode today, we're talking about what you can do once you've transitioned or as you plan to transition into entrepreneurship, or maybe you have transitioned and now you're just starting to wonder how to handle your healthcare costs. I think as you all know, healthcare can be one of those big expenses, definitely a huge financial derailer. Just going to the ER, out-of-pocket cost could be several $1,000s. And then if actually something terrible happens and you need serious help, thank you all ER physicians for the good work you do, but you are terribly expensive. You may run up tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
I'm pretty sure they're not setting the prices.
No, they probably aren't. No.
You just made a lot of people very angry.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, we're thankful for all the good work you are, but yeah, as someone who has had to recently visit the ER, it's like, holy cow, That's not inexpensive trip. So, rightfully so, we have to wonder, like, how do we handle and prepare? Part of our tagline in the show is financial planning for the risk taker. How do we financially plan for healthcare costs? And the good news that we have for you folks is we have a couple different possibilities for what you want to consider. But before we delve into that, is there any other introductory thoughts that you have, Andrew, on the show?
Well, I'm the plug guy apparently this week. So last week we had a great episode all about risk and really risks in pursuit of funding your FI entrepreneurship. So we covered wholesome things like borrowing from your retirement account or raiding the kids' college fund and hitting up your relatives for loans to make Thanksgiving a truly smooth event every year. But it was a really fun episode. So if you haven't listened to it, I would say check it out, see what it's all about. And there's a lot of good ideas there. But for this week, we really do want to take the dive into healthcare because as much as we try to be comfortable with risk, we think that healthcare is, I think, generally not something that most people are comfortable with taking a lot of risks with. Ben said himself, he was just in the ER. And for Ben to walk out of the ER saying, holy moly, this was a little bit more expensive than I hoped it would be, I can imagine a lot of people feel that way. And for better or worse, in America, we've got the healthcare system that we do have. So figuring out how best to navigate it, I think, is an important tool that can set up anyone for success.
For sure. Well, with those thoughts in mind, what are some of the practical takeaways we want you guys to have from this call? I think the first choice, and it's somewhat obvious, but could easily be overlooked as well. Let's just see if you can get healthcare coverage through your spouse. Now, obviously, if both of you are transitioning into entrepreneurship, that's probably not going to be much of a working solution. But oftentimes we would encourage that one of you stays employed in some capacity as that reliable, steady income that you can ultimately bank and run your finances on. And one of the big values of that is what kind of healthcare coverage does that spouse provide? Is that a good plan and something we want to utilize or could utilize for the short term? Quite frankly, if you got good healthcare coverage through the spouse, then this is a pretty simple decision. We just simply continue to get coverage or switch coverage over to the spouse, and now we're ready to go. I suppose, Andrew, this is a thought that hadn't crossed my mind, but do you know off the top of your head, would this be considered an open enrollment qualifying life event if the spouse has lost a job and now lost a job voluntarily by, let's say, transitioning and wants to get on the healthcare plan of the spouse?
Wow. No.
No immediate thoughts on that. He wasn't ready for that one.
I was really hoping that was a rhetorical question. Did you know the answer?
I don't actually.
That's a great question.
That's a thought we'll have to follow up on and bring up. That would be the biggest concern that I would have in this space is your termination of employment going to be a qualifying life event?
So outside of open enrollment, are you able to add a spouse to your plan if the spouse has left their job due to choice or changing position? I don't know. That's a fantastic question. I'm going to have to dig into that and hopefully we'll provide it in the show notes for you.
Yeah, just as additional discussion, folks, as you're probably aware. So if you have a new baby or if you get married, or if you ultimately take on a new job within the first 30 days of any of these life events, those allow you the opportunity to make changes to your health insurance. The reason or the rationale behind why health insurance companies or insurance companies on the whole just don't allow changes to be open-ended is quite frankly because people would game the system. If they knew that, hey, I'm getting sick or I'm not feeling well, I need to get some health insurance coverage, let's say, and now they could just let you jump on. The insurance business is a very contractual based arrangement, and it tends to be the case that once an insurance company has said, yeah, we'll insure you, they're on the hook for whatever may come. And they do not want someone to be coming with the idea of something in play that they're trying to secretly hide and they're getting on before it comes into full sight. So they limit your ability to just jump on at any time. So you have to have these qualifying events in order to be able to change that coverage up. That would be the biggest concern with switching over to the spouse's coverage. But apart from the financials of it making work, there could be your simple and most straightforward solution, really without question. Now, the next one would be to consider an option called Cobra. This is ultimately a continuation of coverage that's provided, really mandated, federally speaking, in which you can't just simply lose health insurance because you've lost your job. And we have a kind of a goofy arrangement, quite frankly, where health insurance, if you think of most of the insurances we have in our lives, they're acquired voluntarily, private, individually, and separate from your employment. There are a few insurances that you can get as an employee benefit, but really until recently with the American Care Act, you couldn't almost get insured unless you were employed in some capacity. Still, it's the primary means by which you are insured. And I just simply kind of want to state out loud that it's a bit of an oddity. Health insurance is largely driven by your employer. But because it is driven by the employer and potentially the loss of coverage in the termination of employment, it is federally mandated that you can continue to stay covered through the employer's healthcare provider, their insurance, up to usually 3 years. There's various limits associated with this, but it's up to 36 months after employment has ended. And this is just meant to be so that you don't suddenly come to the end of your healthcare coverage and potentially put yourself in a financial bind. So a potential solution, let's say the spouse doesn't have particularly good coverage, or maybe you're non-married, or you're living in a lifetime partnership. However, your situation you may find yourself to be in, Cobra could be another option for you to consider. Now, one of the drawbacks to Cobra, speaking off the top of the matter, is you won't receive any employer coverage or participation subsidy of that premium. The employer isn't going to continue, obviously, to pay your portion of the premium if you're not employed with them. That seems like a reasonable request. So your premium for what you're accustomed to paying for the coverage will certainly go up in light of that, because now you're going to start paying what the employer had been paying on your behalf. But you would still stay covered, and whether or not to pursue and utilize this really is just kind of dependent on how long it is that you think you would need to be insured before you could come through another means of insurance. This could be a great short-term play. It's really just a matter of looking at the details of the plan, what the premium cost would be, and comparing that against other options. But why would you maybe stay on with your employer rather than just simply getting your own coverage? Could be a question I'm sure that you're asking yourself. The straightforward answer to that is through basically a wholesale discount. It could be that your employer's plan is ultimately cheaper to you than if you were to go and acquire your own outright individually. And so it would be because of the size of the health insurance plan and what's already been negotiated in terms of their rates versus what you might be able to get rates otherwise. Again, if this wholesaling bulk discount sort of arrangement could make Cobra compelling, all things considered. With all that said, Andrew, you have any thoughts to chime in on with Cobra? What's the good, the bad, and the ugly on it?
Well, I think you covered it pretty well. A couple of things to keep in mind. If you're trying to think about what a Cobra plan might cost you, generally it's going to cost you 102% of whatever it cost the employer. They tack on an extra 2%. I think it's 2%. It might be 4%, but you're going to have to bear with me on that. And that's to cover administration costs and whatnot, and probably take a little bit for themselves, I could imagine. To kind of figure that out, you might be able to look at your pay stub. And on a lot of pay stubs, you'll see your employee portion. And then a lot of them like to tell you what the employer portion of that is. They like to let you know what the employer is really paying for your healthcare. So before you quit your job, you might have a good idea of what that's going to cost. And like Ben said, often because of the discounts that they will receive due to purchasing so many plans at the same time, receiving equivalent coverage through Cobra could still be cheaper, even though you are paying both the employee share and the employer share, could wind up still being cheaper than an equivalent plan that you might find individually on the marketplace. So Cobra, not our preferred method probably for long-term healthcare. But if you did have a situation where you needed a bridge to where you could get to a spouse's open enrollment period, or a bridge to where you could get to a point where you get your own coverage or get another job, Cobra can be pretty appealing.
Yeah, I would concur. Cobra, you will get notifications. I mean, the employer is mandated to do this, asking if you want to move forward with Cobra. And off the top of my head, I don't remember the length of time, but you probably have within 60 to 90 days. That's not uncommon time limits to be able to choose to move forward with the Cobra plan, either to opt in or to decline coverage. Of course, we wouldn't want you making this decision after you've terminated from employment. We would hope that you're already coming up with your healthcare plan before you've come to this period in time. So the Cobra, the offer or the invitation for Cobra wouldn't be something, you'll see that invitation, but hopefully your mind has already been made up at that point in time as to which way you're going to be handling your healthcare cost. Now, a more conventional choice moving beyond the spouse's coverage and Cobra would be just simply to go out and get individual coverage now through the marketplace. This has been opened up through the American CARES Act that came into effect, probably 10 or 12 years ago, now maybe a little longer. So a relatively new adjustment in how healthcare is provided. But we have what's often referred to as the open marketplace or the state marketplace for healthcare coverage. So each of these are state sponsored. I think simply typing in healthcare marketplace and your state of residence in Google would go a long ways.
healthcare.gov is also a very good place to start.
Oh, there you go. So healthcare.gov, and just simply starting to look through the various plans that your state offers. I've heard mixed bags or mixed reports on this from folks as to what that premium out-of-pocket cost is going to run you. Sometimes it seems exorbitantly high, and other times it's reasonable. Quite frankly, how valuable of this as a solution is going to be on your state of residence. I think there's a lot of variation here. But to help to this point, I do think these health plans can be robust and worthwhile, and it's certainly worth an investigation as you consider it. And a few items to assist in the coverage of this tax angle have to deal with what's called the premium tax credit. And then also, if you're self-employed, the self-employment health insurance deduction. So let's talk a little bit about those two tax supports as you consider going forward with a conventional individual marketplace plan. And what I mean by individual, I just mean you as a household or individual are acquiring this plan. I'm not saying that your coverage is limited to you individually. It's just meant to be that it's coverage that you're acquiring rather than getting through your employer. So the premium tax credit, this is kind of a fun credit. Andrew, do you know the form that this comes in on, or that we would see this for tax purposes? I'm testing you on the fly here. Oh, man.
The form. Form. I'm ready for my EA test. I believe it is the 8962. He gave me a softball one. Yeah, that's the form that I'm on, the 8962. If you're going to try and hopefully succeed in claiming the premium tax credit, and for some people, this credit will wipe out the cost of their premiums, you will use the form 8962. That's our special number for the day.
Well, Form 8962 is where the premium tax credit itself is being determined.
Oh, goodness.
But the form for knowing whether or not to input it into your software, if you're using some tax software or you want to pass to your tax preparer, is Form 1095A.
Oh.
You got the whole 1095 series, 1095B, 1095C, and then
all right. So
95A.
Come on. The 1095A is actually what's going to let you know how much you paid in premiums, and you'll take that information and also use that in conjunction with the 8962. So the 1095A is where they report how much you spent on healthcare premiums during the year. That's the informational form you'll receive to then claim the tax credit on the 8962. We're going to have to call that one a draw, I think.
Okay, we'll call it a draw. That was fun. Folks, you can see how much I prepped him for that. Yeah, I think he's a little off guard.
This is the worst podcast recording ever. Let's get into the requirements of the premium tax credit. Transitioning.
So what is this premium tax credit? This is probably one of the goofiest credits we have in the whole IRS bundle, isn't it?
Oh, it's crazy, isn't it?
It is a little.
The American tax code, they just don't know what else they want to do to keep you confused, right?
I think that's true.
The main requirement for this credit is that your income be from 100% to 400% of the federal poverty limit. And in the year 2022, for a family of four, the federal poverty limit is $27,750. So from $27,750 to 4 times that.
Let's say
I'm going to call it 110.
80,000. There you go. Or what would
4 times 30?
25 would be. Yeah, there you go. It would be. Yeah, so, yeah, look at us.
Oh my goodness.
Us math wizards. I'm just going to, where's my calculator?
We are never getting a client again.
111,000 folks. There you go. That's the number.
There you go. If I was in The Price is Right, I would have done very well.
You're doing good.
So from about 30,000 to about 110,000, if that is your income, and income in this case is measured by modified adjusted gross income, which is another complicated and convoluted thing that most people don't understand. So if you look at your 1040, you'll have a line that says adjusted gross income. Nowhere on the form do you see modified. Modified adjusted gross income is the adjusted gross income on your federal tax return plus any excluded foreign income. For most people, that might be $10 to $20 that you get as a credit through the foreign tax credit, okay? Non-taxable Social Security benefits, and then tax-exempt interest received or accrued during the year. So if you got some weird bonds out there that you're not paying tax on, and then the full amount of your Social Security benefits, that would be taxable, that's getting added back in. Right, Ben?
That's right. Yeah, we have the MAGI, as they call them. Yeah, modified adjusted gross. Always, that's a fun calculation. Done on a worksheet separate from your tax filing for those who just want to know that stuff.
What's the number of the form?
That's a worksheet, man. There's a number associated with that.
That was a trick question.
That's right. So, but the premium tax credit, how does this function? The thing to watch out for, because we've seen people get surprised by this. So when you complete your individual enrollment application, you need to provide basically what your household income is. And effectively, what they're trying to do is adjust the premium. It's kind of like pay what you can. So what's your household income? Okay, the full premium would be this, but obviously that could get rather burdensome and maybe you wouldn't want to pay premiums or you wouldn't move forward with coverage. The whole point of the American CARES Act was to get people to participate in coverage, even who were otherwise found it too expensive. So there's the use of this premium tax credit, which basically adjusts the premium down to a more manageable level. But this isn't necessarily a freebie. You effectively are getting an advance by the federal government in which they're basing what you think your household income will be for the year when you go to file your taxes, and they're adjusting your premium down to this lower amount. But when you actually go to file your taxes, we now have a final number, authoritative number as to what your household income actually is. And now they're going to go back and say, okay, well, this is what you paid in premiums. This is what we gave you in advance. Was that the right amount? How robust was that household income of yours? If it tended to be on the lower side, then that full advance that they gave you stays as tax-free income effectively, and the premium you paid was the premium that you paid. That's all that you had to pay. But if your income, let's say, came up to be quite a bit more than what you expected it to be, I don't know, perhaps your spouse ended up killing it or something in the job, or perhaps you had a fantastic year as an entrepreneur. If that household income now is actually higher than what you initially said when you completed this, those advance payments to reduce your premium when you had first enrolled in this are going to have to get paid back by you. So this is a one credit. It's kind of a credit because it's an advance and it does stick if your AGI ends up being what you thought it to be. But it's also kind of a loan against the government that, now you have to pay this back. And not uncommonly, have we seen folks get kind of blindsided by this where they call it a credit, but it's really a tax. When the calculation is done, you may owe, let's say, $4,000 because they've determined that you received too much in credit over the course of the year and those premiums were too low for what your actual household income was. And now it's needing to get adjusted and fixed. So all that to say is, look, this premium tax credit can certainly be worthwhile. The intent behind this is to make those premiums more affordable, to get you in coverage and to have it adjusted to your income level. But be sensitive or at least aware of what your household income is. And if things go better than what you initially thought them to be and what the household income was when you first enrolled, you may be seeing this come back to you on your tax filing where you effectively are paying more back. Your premiums are getting adjusted on the tax return, and now you're repaying what was initially covered by the government is getting repaid back by you through taxes. Nonetheless, it can be a great way for you to get coverage and not have it be too burdensome. Now, the other thing that we need to talk about, Andrew, is the self-employed health insurance deduction and whether or not you can take advantage of that. So you may be thinking, look, I'm self-employed, I'm paying my health insurance premiums, I certainly can get a deduction for that. And the answer to that is yes, you certainly can get a health insurance deduction, but like with all things with the IRS, it depends. It depends on your situation and whether or not you meet all the other requirements. And what would those be? The big one where we see things to become problematic is for this deduction is whether or not your spouse has coverage. So if you only have decided, you know what, I don't want to be on my spouse's coverage, or maybe my spouse's coverage stinks, I think we're actually better off having our own coverage through one of these individual plans. You can do that and you can still get the premium tax credit. I'd have to double check that, but I believe that credit still comes into play regardless of whether or not your spouse has access to coverage. But that self-employment tax deduction, you being able to write off the premiums you pay, is not deductible.
The premium tax credit?
What about the premium tax credit?
The premium tax credit would not come into play. So there's a few caveats on that. The premium tax credit, if you're married filing separately, no dice.
Oh.
Unless you're a subject of domestic abuse or something like that, then you're able to submit a form for that. But the other thing, if you are able to get what's called a minimal and affordable coverage through an eligible employer-sponsored plan, and that could be through yourself or through your spouse, if either of those things are available, you're not eligible for this. Basically, they don't want to give this to anyone that they don't have to give it to. You are also talking about them taking back any excess money. It's really kind of apropos that they're making sure they get their pound of flesh on a healthcare credit But yeah, those are a couple of things that you really do have to be aware of. That if your spouse has a plan and you think you're going to go out and get this credit, 99% of the time you're not going to.
Well, there you go. That's a good point and a tidbit. It's some of this stuff, it's hard to keep up on the details, and we always have to circle back to them ourselves when we come across it just to double check the rules and requirements because they can be many. I think to bring this point perhaps home better, Andrew, it's becoming rather clear that if your spouse does have their coverage, really the best option for you is to get on that spouse's plan regardless, because, the tax subsidies that you would get otherwise just simply aren't going to be there for you. And so that cuts us to a point that maybe we need to give an additional subject matter its own discussion, is whether or not to not go forward with anything within the conventional mean for health insurance coverage. Should we do something non-conventional? Because, conventionally, there can be benefits, obviously, to this. And what I mean by conventional is getting what's outright called health insurance. But as some of you may know, and we'll have this as a dedicated subject, is what about if we do something like a healthcare sharing ministry or go through a DPC, a direct primary care physician that you effectively pay a monthly subscription model to, not technically insurance any longer, but you are getting your healthcare costs covered. So what we'd like to give attention to, and we'll really, I think, just dedicate this as a whole episode, is whether or not to do the non-conventional route for health insurance. And I just said health insurance. Again, this is technically not health insurance.
Technically not. It's very specifically designed to not be classified as health insurance, because if these organizations, these health share and direct primary care organizations were quantified and codified as health insurance, they would then fall under all of these restrictions and regulations that exist. So it's very specifically, very not. It is not, you are opting out, you're getting outside of the general bounds of what is conventional and kind of going your own way, but it might work for some. And this is, a podcast about risk taking. So I think it's something that we definitely should be touching upon and taking a look at.
Yeah. And what's valuable about this, entrepreneurship aside, if you come into FI, financial independence as it's currently known as, where you've chosen to live off your investments, maybe your real estate portfolio or what you've held aside in what you've saved, if it's money tied up in the capital markets, many times we still have this question of what am I going to do for health insurance? Because presumably in a classic situation of this, neither one of you are working. And maybe neither one of you have your side business, your entrepreneurial gig, your side hustle. So the question here is still, in either event, how do we cover health insurance? The reality is going this non-conventional route could be the more affordable choice. So this isn't necessarily tied to being self-employed. It's just simply tied to FI. So let's plan to save that, folks. We'll tease you on that as our next episode of what's this non-conventional route look like. But as a reminder, I think your options for health insurance coverage, probably really the most obvious choice is, what can we do to get on the spouse's plan? You don't have to go that route, but recognize that if you do go with individual coverage, some of these tax breaks, the self-employment tax deduction and the premium tax credit will be minimized, if not disallowed altogether. So really that spouse's coverage could simply just be the best way to go. But you could also try to stay on your current coverage through Cobra as another possibility. Or you could ultimately go and get individual coverage with, again, the tax deductions and premium tax with their benefit or without their benefit. We shouldn't always let the tax tail wag the dog. So just because there aren't tax breaks necessarily going that route, let's say your spouse has just truly horrible coverage, it could still be worthwhile going and getting that individual coverage rather than being on the spouse's plan. But I would say if we're in a situation where the spouse has really bad coverage, the individual plans offered to you through your state are pretty cruddy. And Cobra also stinks. You just really don't have any good options left to you. And we could very much find yourself in that situation. The question is there anything available to you? Yes, thankfully there still is, but it is non-conventional. And that's really going to be the focus of our next episode. So please stay tuned as we get into the details of what this last option or possibility would be.
All right. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. I hope you've had as much fun as we did. If you'd like to learn more about any of the subjects we spoke about, please visit our website for show notes, links, and more. Hit like, subscribe, or whatever button you've got in front of you to show some love. Remember, the information presented in this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only.
Remember what Teddy Roosevelt said about the person who strives greatly. If he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Until next time, keep striving.
Thanks again, and be well.